So for all the younger folks, I think that's how we would say it. You have a 12-team playoff in college football. Just last year, you had a 4-team playoff. There was this time when a computer decided when who was number one and number two. That went over well. And then before that, well, you could have number one play number four wins, and they're the national champion. Today, I have what I think is the best independent YouTuber in college football. And by the way, I think one of the most knowledgeable college football leaders, major media or private. On the show, he has a new book called Disputed National Champions. Folks, one of the nicest guys in the business and one of the most knowledgeable, Mark Rogers. Thanks for coming on the show, my friend.
Hey, Brian. Great to see you. For a second there, I thought you had a next guest after me. I was waiting to see who that was going to be.
No. I nailed it the first time around. Mark, congratulations on your book.
Thank you so much. It's something I've wanted to do for a long, long time and finally got around to it. Had some challenges, as we all do in life, to get this thing done. A lot of people have asked me, wow, it seems daunting to write a book. And I would certainly agree with that part of it. But this kind of just flowed from the writing standpoint. The difficulty is I never understood before how this process worked in regards to all the hoops you got to jump through in terms of just putting the formatting together, working with publishers, and so forth and so on. So I kind of took the middle ground where you can go hire a publisher that costs like $1 zillion, or you can do like look up everything on your own. I got a little like self-help kind of deal that walked me through it. And yeah, some of the things that I had never imagined, knew nothing about writing a book in terms of putting the book together. And then the difficulty was not so much the writing, it was we've got a lot of scenarios in here. Then we've got a lot of scenarios that we project forward into the future. And to keep those consistent and that consistency of thought and process together, I would have to comb through it again and comb through it again. And then no. They would not have, because there would have been a tiebreaker here that would have sent them instead. No, we've got to do this over. There was a lot of that involved.
Yeah, there's disputed national champions. One right off the top of my head that I can think of, Michigan and Nebraska. We all know that one. That's very contentious if you speak to either one of those fan bases or anyone who was associated with either one of those conferences. Mark, I know a lot of people know you because you have such a great presence on YouTube. You have the history. Coffee's not working, my friend. History in major media. If you don't mind giving everyone like a minute-long synopsis of your journey up to this point, because I think that a lot of people sees Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, and sometimes forgets just how in-depth and how engrossed you were and still are, obviously, but you were in the whole college football thing because, I mean, it runs deep, my friend. So if you don't mind just going through that for a moment, and then let's get into the book.
I appreciate that. So I don't want to put dates on the years because, boy, I'm going to date myself. So just imagine no internet. And I always wanted to be either a writer. I would read the newspaper, couldn't wait for the sports section every day. Either wanted to be a writer or a broadcaster. So once I get into college, something clicked about sports broadcasting. And I was so adamant about wanting to be a sportscaster that when I went to Kent State University, that I kind of forced them into creating a field of concentration that had never been created before, sportscasting. And that's what I wanted to do. I was tunnel vision. So I got through, of course, had a couple internships at the local ABC station that really set me up for the rest of my career in regards to a resume tape, because that was everything. There was no YouTube then. There was no way to produce videos or get them out there where people could see them. So to have a resume tape and to be an intern for 2 semesters at an ABC station and to actually get on the air, that was huge. So that set me up to look for a job, which again, if you're looking for a broadcasting job, you know that you might be one of 600 applicants to the NBC affiliate in Missoula, Montana, and you just pray, go to your knees and cross your fingers and hope for the best. So I landed in Ashland, Ohio, which was only about an hour from my home. I was a sportscaster there. On the weekends, I did play-by-play for high school football, college football, Ashland University, basketball, all those things that were such a great experience. My first day on the job, I announced a parade. They didn't warn me. They didn't tell me. They just said, you're announcing a parade after the 6 o'clock news. A parade. I don't know how to, I'm 22 years old. I had to announce a parade. But anyway, I was a news anchor, I covered a murder trial, my very first assignment, and was a news anchor. That was a great experience. That kind of set me up, Brian, for moving then to Columbus, Mississippi, to be the sports director at a CBS affiliate, WCBI down there, because I had to cover the SEC. Therefore, I had to cover a lot of scandals, a lot of allegations, NCAA probations. Every program that we covered, both football and basketball, was on probation for the 7 years that I was sports director down there, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Mississippi State. But you talk about best job I've ever had from the standpoint of covering sports, constantly going to big SEC games, College World Series, Final Fours, big bowl games. That was a phenomenal job. Loved it. I left there, had a bit of a detour outside the business for about a year and a half, landed at ESPN when my wife came across an ad that said, we're looking for exhaustive sports knowledge and producer skills. So for 19 years, I was at ESPN. After a couple of years, I landed in management, and that was a great job, great people. You hear a lot of bad things about ESPN. Some of those are true, but overwhelmingly, it was a great experience, a phenomenal experience. I was a production operations manager at ESPN. And the last note in regards to my career would be that while at ESPN and working on the digital side, in addition to my manager's job, people found out that I had a sportscasting background in other departments, people I didn't even know that would call me, text me, email me and say, we understand you have this background, you've been recommended. And I auditioned there. And at the outset of ESPN Digital, which is enormous now, it was just kind of in the basement of the building at that point. You know, we're talking like 2008, 2010, in that range, that they really liked what I presented and wanted me to take off there. Well, I have this other pretty lucrative job over here as a manager in production operations. So I couldn't really do that, but I would freelance. And then somebody let me know, you know, Mark, this is great that you're doing this on the side, but you could do a YouTube channel. Oh, never dawned on me. Yeah, a YouTube channel. So that's been about 12 or 13 years in the making of doing the Voice of College Football, and it has grown and expanded in certain ways. And of course, Brian, we have connected here, I don't know, the last 5 or 6 years. Of course, it's been amazing to see you in different iterations and of course, talking Clemson football most of the time, but I enjoy your work, and obviously you're a first class guy.
Oh, man, that means a lot coming from you. It really does. And folks, I just want to say this, I want to be very careful. I'm not taking shots at anyone specifically here, but not everyone that I encounter in the YouTube world is stand-up. I mean, I hate to say that. I mean, but you know, it's still the world. You still encounter people. And Mark is one of the finest. So I appreciate that coming from you. It really means a lot. So Mark, you have a lot of experience. Like, you have experience that no one else has. And I always enjoy hearing those experiences because, well, it's outside of what most common people will ever encounter, will ever face some of the stress that you would never know that there's stress there. So you're outrageously experienced and knowledgeable. That leads you to this book, Disputed National Champions. What led you to write it? And then just kind of take us through a little bit of the book and kind of shed some light on this great piece, because I can remember, I named off immediately Nebraska and Michigan. I mean, I was the Michigan team with Charles Woodson on it. That was a Tom Osborne-led Nebraska team that was ripping people's heads off. Today, it's still disputed. There's others. What led you to write the book, and kind of give us some insight into it?
I'm smiling because you gave me a bit of a flashback there to my first interview at ESPN when they asked me about facing a difficult situation, a stressful situation. I was supposed to be on the 11 o'clock news outside the what was the Georgia Dome at the time of the SEC championship game in 1998, and I was stuck up in the press box, a million levels up, and
Oh.
I couldn't get down. The elevators were jammed. There were like thousands of people in front of me. Couldn't get down. Needed to meet my cameraman, who I told to leave the sideline at a particular time, and I could still see him 15 minutes later still taking video on the sideline when I told him, when it's 10:15, you leave and head to the site where we're recording, but anyway, or going live. Anyway, so yes, sorry to divert the conversation there,
No.
but in regards to the book here, Brian, I've always questioned things. I was always the guy in the management meeting when we got our direction from programming to say, we're doing X, Y, and Z. We need this execution. And I would say, why are we going straight to the, such and such programming after we should be doing that, out of my lane? I would question things. So what I questioned here is, people can't imagine, and you kind of set it up for some of our younger viewers at the top of the recording here, was that when I was 10 years old, when I first got into college football, you would watch all the big New Year's Day bowl games, and you kind of knew who won the national championship, or you think you did, but you had to wait till the newspaper came out the next morning. Actually, imagine, folks, you'd go to bed that night thinking, I think they should be because they were number 3 and they beat number 1, but number 2 won. So are they going to go with number 2? You'd have to wait till the AP poll and the coaches poll was shown in the newspaper the next day. And I always questioned that. I was the guy, Brian, as a 16-year-old in high school who wrote, and this is in 1984, so I've now dated myself, that wrote a paper for an English class outlining a 16-team college football playoff in 1984.
Wow.
So I've always thought that way. Like, well, I watch the NFL playoffs. I'm watching the NBA play. Why am I not watching a college football playoffs? The reason I chose this decade, so we've gone through the 1990s year by year, is I just think it to be the most impactful and the most formative, transformative decade in determining a champion in college football. And it's also, I think, a sweet spot for a lot of viewers in regards to an age range where they're very intimately connected. And so when you think about it, we started this decade in 1990, as you outlined, with just simply, think, folks, if you have as much angst for the AP poll at times as I do, which led me to doing my own top 25, because I got sick of producing videos ripping the AP poll for being completely out of their mind and illogical, that yes, what the AP writers thought, what the coaches thought, typically not coaches voting in that poll, it's their sports information directors, that was the national champion. But I just didn't take it. A lot of people just take what they're given as, okay, well, if they said it, it must be true. And I'd be like, look at this number 3 team. Look at their resume. Look wait a minute, they've got just as good a resume. So I'm constantly thinking like that. And I selected this decade, Brian, because we went from strictly the writers and the coaches voting for the national champion, and there being splits, as you mentioned, 1990, 91, 97 in that decade, to, okay, a bowl coalition came together. And that's a term that's been lost on a lot of people. But basically that was at least some powers that be got together to say, we're going to match up at least number 1 and number 2, because you could be the SEC champion at number 1 and they're not grabbing the best option to play in terms of a football matchup. They're grabbing the best brand. Notre Dame could be number 13 in the country. No, they're going to get the most eyes. Notre Dame's going to come to the Sugar Bowl and play Alabama, and we're going to have a 1 versus 13 matchup. And it didn't always make sense what the matchups were because of the conference of ties, but also the brands that the bowl people would go grab because they just wanted the most eyeballs. But even then, the Big Ten and the Pac-10 said, no, thanks. We're not going to be part of your bowl coalition because the Rose Bowl is too important to us. So that even fouled things up a number of times. And then, of course, we go into the BCS, and that set the stage for the 14 playoff, the 12-team playoff, and the 14-team playoff that we could see down the road.
Mark Rogers, TV, the voice of college football. He's been a friend of me for a very long time. Glad to have you on talking about this. Let's talk about. I haven't read your book, but this is something that came to mind immediately. I believe it's 1993. You have Charlie Ward and the Florida State Seminoles. They're undefeated. They go to South Bend and play in the game that I think it was one of the, at the time, most well-produced games ever. The pregame, everything. Notre Dame on NBC. Bob Costas, I can see it right now. Folks, you can actually go on YouTube and pull up the pregame. I mean, this was a big deal. I was a kid. And Notre Dame beats Florida State. The very next week, if memory serves me correct, the Boston College team comes in, kicks a field goal, beats Notre Dame. Now, Florida State goes on later on, beats Nebraska in the national. Well, yeah, right
Close.
Yeah. And then think about this. Notre Dame, I believe, goes, this right off the top of my head, goes to the Sugar Bowl, plays Texas A&M, wins, by the way, wins. What does Lou Holtz come out and say? He says, if they won, talking about Florida State, we deserve a share of the national championship. Okay, folks, as much as Notre Dame gets the golden spoon in their mouth all the time, by the way things were operating then, tell me where he's wrong. So that sets up this scenario that that Mark's talking about with the disputed national champions. Let's dive into a few of these teams, if you don't mind, that really sticks out to you. For me, it's obviously Nebraska and Michigan. I just brought up this scenario. Talk about some of the teams, even if it's some of the same ones, that in those scenarios that sticks out for you.
Well, the split vote obviously takes everyone's attention. So everyone gravitates to the split votes because that's obvious and understandable. I'm glad you brought up 1993 because that one seems to get bypassed, that Florida State won a national championship. Bobby Bowden deserved it. He had been dominant, but they kept losing the wrong game every year and kept finishing in the top 5. And we outline all of that in the book. But as you mentioned, and you gave a great picture of what that broadcast was like and how that captivated college football. What's interesting about that season is that West Virginia was undefeated. They went to the Sugar Bowl. They got completely trounced. So nobody's going to stand up for West Virginia as a national champion. But you have to kind of erase the postseason, put that on hold and think, okay, when we were at the point of decision of what should be done in the postseason, what should have been done in the postseason. Actually, Nebraska and West Virginia were the 2 undefeated teams in 1993. And Notre Dame and Florida State had a loss. And as you mentioned, second to last week of a little bit earlier in the season, early November was that matchup, Notre Dame and Florida State, in which Notre Dame, despite only a 1-score win, they had a 2-score lead in the fourth quarter. Florida State was playing in a little desperation. So Notre Dame was the better team on that day. And then people tend to look at that Boston College game without doing any research, thinking, it's Boston College. That's a bad loss. You got to knock them down. Well, they went 9-3. They were number 13 in the country. It was a pretty good Boston College team that won on the last play of the game, 41-39. So to me, the ultimate in breaking ties in any sport with similar records is, of course, on the field, head to head. So to me, Notre Dame should share a national championship, should at least share a national championship with Florida State. And I understand that we can't erase out of our memory that West Virginia was completely outclassed and annihilated by Florida. So I'm not giving West Virginia a national championship by any stretch. But if you wipe out the postseason and say what decision could have been or maybe should have been made at the end of 1993, well, West Virginia had played in a Big East that wasn't dominant, but they had a pretty rough schedule. They had a pretty formidable schedule, and they were undefeated. Nebraska was undefeated as well.
So let's pause here. It deals with your book, but it also deals with our current state of college football. I did a video earlier this week, and of course I was stirring the pot a little bit. But look at what's
You
going
do that?
on. I've never done that, Mark. I'm above
It's
doing
out of
that. Thank you
character.
very much.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. God is like, please no lightning bolts. No, I was stirring the pot, and I said, hey, does a 3-loss SEC team get in? Now I was stretching there, but as this season plays on, we're going to see more 2-loss SEC teams. And a lot of people, they really don't like this. This is where people start operating, like you said, outside of reality. Their fandom gets them drunk on what's fair versus what's real. Okay? Part of that is if you take, let's just say Texas A&M loses to the Chickens of South Carolina this weekend, but they only have 2 losses all season and only 1 loss in conference. If you take that team and you say Texas A&M versus an undefeated Iowa State team, who wins? Without even thought, you go Texas A&M. 2-loss Tennessee team. If they played BYU tomorrow, who wins the game? Tennessee. That's how a lot of times, not always, that these conferences, or not conferences, but these playoff committees look at things, and that's how you see a 2-loss get in. Also, we see favoritism like you're talking about. So it's not always fair and cut and dry and this, that, and the other. So whether you have this system where number 1s versus number 4 wins, they're the national champions, or you have someone who's undefeated versus a 2-loss SEC team, it really doesn't matter at this point. It's who's deciding which brand, and that makes people feel uncomfortable. Brand goes in, who's going to bring in viewership, who people will be interested in the games, because transparently, I'm really not interested in watching Iowa State versus, say, Penn State. I really don't care about that game. But if you set up a game like, I don't know, Ohio State versus Georgia, I'm all eyes. So I went on a rant there. I'm sorry. So going back into your book and talking about brand and so on, how much does brand and media and marketing, how much of that was not only plays into it today, how much it was playing into it at that time?
Well, at that time, I think it actually played into it more than it does now, because nobody was having to answer to anyone. For as much as we see the playoff committee making up answers, and I've always said it this way, the playoff committee, I think, does a reasonable job, but I've certainly criticized them on occasion.
Sure.
But I think overall they've done a decent job. And you can go through the 14 playoff era, and I have some exceptions to not necessarily challenge what they selected, but to say, hey, this number 5 team, they were just as good, but I can understand their reasoning and their thought. But back then, there was no accountability. So again, getting back to the current situation, the playoff committee, to me, they have a list of reasons. They have a list of, and the consistency is that they use all those reasons, but the inconsistency is they apply them differently based on the situation. They go to, okay, we can go to head here to prove our point or back us up, or no, we can go to strength of schedule here. We ignored it in this situation over here, but we're going to go to it here. So they've got their talking points, but they just apply them differently to different situations. But back then, there was no accountability, period. So if we're going to go 1997 prior, it's just writers voting, and it's the coaches voting, which, just to explain that real quick, we've got a coaches poll, of course. And so some people out there think the coaches actually vote on these teams. No, they got sports information directors. I was in communication when I was in Mississippi with the Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Alabama sports information directors like daily. And they would tell me they fill out the ballot for the coach. Now, the coach may say, depending on their level of involvement and care, they may say, we want our rival to, we want them, put them like number 5. Or they may say, just knock them down, whatever they think is better for them. Or obviously shoot us up a few spots, or we don't like them, knock them down. But other than that, you go fill it out. So the accountability piece, I think, also extends to the bowl selection committees themselves that we don't think about. The bowl officials that back then they would just run to whomever they thought would get the best TV ratings and draw the biggest crowds. You know, we had a 1980 situation where Georgia was number one, and let's grab Notre Dame. They have no say in this national championship race. They're number 7 in the country, but they're going to be the best draw. That's who we're going to match up against Georgia to play for a quote unquote national championship. And we had that on and on and on. Getting to the current state, you know what team intrigues me, Brian, right now? SMU. Okay. And because you're touting the big brands and the big boys and the intriguing matchups and kind of suppressing what you don't want to see. Think about this though. SMU, if they run the table, they finish 11-1. Their one loss. What if BYU just has this remarkable season? This continues. SMU's one loss is a 3-point loss to BYU, and SMU in a 3-way tie with Clemson and Miami, the way things are trending right now, would have the worst opponent's record in the ACC. Therefore, they would be left out of the ACC championship game. So they're 11-1. They're 8-0 in conference. They've lost by a field goal to a BYU team that might be the Big 12 champion.
Right.
And they are going to get compared to a bunch of 10-2 Big 10 and SEC teams, maybe get left out because they're only one game better in record, but they could throw up their hands and say, you know, it's one thing to get left out of a 3-way tie for a conference championship game when you're all 6-2. Right. But if you're 8-0, like, oh, what else were we supposed to do? That I want chaos. I want log jams in these conferences. And I said it the entire offseason, Brian, that because of these leagues becoming so large that, you know, just do the math. Let's say on the Big Ten, you got 18 teams, you play 9 games. Therefore, you're missing 8 opponents, possible opponents that you should be playing. It's going to create more issues with teams tying that did not play each other. And it's going to create more chaos. And for me, I think that's fun. It screws a lot of teams, but it's fun to figure out.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people, they really don't stop and think about. That there's going to be some ties that you can't get out of. SMU, they do play Pittsburgh, but they're not playing Clemson. They're not playing Miami. Miami and Clemson, they're not playing one another in the regular season. None of us knew that Florida State would have this terrible crash. I mean, who saw that coming? But it's kind of funny, and I have some great Florida State friends. But I mean, come on, y'all. Anyway, so that transfer portal really works, and giving a coach a fat contract. But I'm leaving that alone, Mark. I have you on the channel. I'm not stirring the pot at all. But you know, you have Miami and Clemson not playing one another in the regular season. And there's a chance of a 3-way tie. You have a chance of this SMU team winning out, only lost to BYU. Let's say BYU gets into the college football playoff, and it's like we only lost to the team that got into the college football playoff. I mean, yeah, it's going to create a lot of mayhem. So have in your research, and I know you research out the wazoo, and I've spoke to people who's wrote books. And they said that they started out with an idea, and as they began to peel back the onion was not a regular onion about this big. It was like way bigger. Did you ever run into a point to where it was like information overload, and then you had to stop, recalibrate, and say, okay, there's just too much information. I mean, the book will be this thick and no one will read it.
Yeah, so just to kind of outline how I'm approaching this and how I did approach this. So this is not just a history book, folks, even though I love history overall and sports history. But I do go through each season, 1990 through 99, and I basically set the stage of what was the vibe, the attitude, the feel of this season going into it. I give a preseason look at what were we expecting, and then I lay out and I kind of take one team as being kind of the team of that season, not necessarily the eventual champion, but the team like Virginia Tech in 1999. They come out of nowhere. They play in the national championship game. They had never been on the national stage for anything relevant. I kind of give a narrative on what was Virginia Tech football. How did Frank Beamer make this happen, and so forth. So I give a bit of a narrative going into the season. I outline the key games in the season that kind of changed the polls and moved things around and how we got to the conclusion. And then the postseason decision on who went where and why. And these are the big postseason matchups that were impactful to the number one spot. And then I give a postseason section of this is how the postseason played out in the bowl games, what the controversies were. Then I have a section where I write, was the vote valid? The AP poll, the coaches poll, was it a valid and credible vote? Then I got a section on who was left out, who got screwed. Was there anybody that got screwed that has a claim? And then I give kind of an aftermath of what was the historical significance of this season. Was this Tom Osborne's first national championship, and that was legendary, and that cemented him as an all-time great? Was this the end of an era? Was this the beginning or launching of a dynasty? How did this impact the game? And then what I did that I found the most fun was taking all this and projecting it toward the future. So the first thing I did was, of course, we had no conference championship games prior to 1992 with the SEC. And then we had the Big 12 start in 1996, and the ACC and the Big 10, and the now defunct Pac-10, Pac-12, did not, during the course of this book, ever have a championship game. But I found it interesting. Let's see who would have played in the conference championship games in all those conferences, all those seasons. So that was step number one. And then I take those seasons and I lift all the results and I dump them into the BCS era, and I dump them into the 4-team college football playoff, and I dump them into the 12-team playoff era. And then I figured, by the time I get this thing done, we might have a 14-team playoff. We better attack that as well because that's being proposed. So I dump it into the 14-team. That is what became complicated because you've got, I didn't work out the math to see the percentages of teams that are now in different conferences. So to kind of project, I have to take a few liberties, but they're logical liberties. They can't be determined otherwise of how things would have played out with all these teams playing in different conferences. But it was fun to take these seasons and play them out in these different formulas to see, wow, if this was a 14 playoff, this is what it would have been, or a 12-team playoff. And look at these strange teams that would have showed up because you get this wild card group of 5, of course. We got some Colorado State appearances in the playoffs here.
Wow.
Some strange things like that are really interesting. And again, there was a level of, I don't want to elevate this to like rocket science by any stretch, but where you had to like really think it through to not get tripped up because you got all these ties and all these decisions to make of trying to relay these scenarios into different eras. And it was fun. And I hope people have fun going through it.
I bet as you were going through those teams, you were seeing names that, have even had fruitful careers in the NFL, and they've been long retired. And you saw those names. And then you probably, as you were going through these teams, saw some names that maybe, not to be grim, but maybe some things didn't work out so well for them in life. And you're like, I remember when they were like the hottest thing in college football. So
absolutely.
So I can just see that now as all these teams and all these scenarios, moving forward. I mean, let's think about, from the timeline that you wrote this book based on, but going back for a few years, I mean, think about that UCF team that got left out in 2017, somewhere in there. That would have been fun to watch in a playoff scenario. We had the really good TCU team that Gary Patterson took them to the Rose Bowl. That would have been interesting to see in the playoff era as well. Now, you know me, I'm inquisitive. I look at things just because someone is deemed an expert. I don't buy it. When I was in school many years ago, I had a sociology teacher who she and I disagreed on a variety of subjects, but I agreed with her on this one. She said, if you ever look at a survey or a results of a survey or some type of study, always ask this question: who funded the study? Who funded the research? Because you may have found the the results that they wanted to find versus what they actually found. So going down this trail, and I'm just going to leave it like that, going down this trail, is there anything in this book, or will there be a second book that you could be able to potentially put together, people who were bought off to sway the results of how a number 4 can become a national champion?
Wow. I thought I was just going to run off at the mouth this entire time, which I have to this point. But that's an interesting question that I didn't necessarily. We know we can't be naive about this, that whatever industry in this great country we're talking about, and certainly college football falls right into it, there is money involved. And anytime there's money and power involved, control, then there are going to be not the best interests of the fans, the players, or fairness is not always going to win. So we know that to be. What I find more and more evident as we've gone now into this era of paying players, NIL, transfer portal, all of this has just exploded in our faces here in the last few years, Brian, is that what has made this all gangly and clumsy is that college football started out, this was not a professional league. So college football started out as a club sport to a certain extent. It was a recreational. It was like, these guys are really good at football. They put together a football team. So it's marched through the ages and it's gained popularity. And of course, television changed everything, because now you can deliver the product in front of millions of people and make millions of dollars and billions of dollars now. So I think that was really the forerunner of all this. But so the structure of college athletics has always been amateur, but it's been confronted by this tension of, no, it's a business. It is a business. And so that's why we've arrived at a place, and I'm going to take a few people off the hook, or just institutions or the structure off the hook to a certain extent, to say no one ever stepped in to say, this has evolved to a point where it's now a business. So all those things weren't dealt with in a clean and direct manner. They just there was this tension of, it's a business. No, its structure and its foundation is in amateurism. And so I think that's been one of the things that we've seen played out during the last decade in particular, that's been very messy.
Yeah, you get a lot of money involved, and hey, look, I'm not against people making a lot of money at all. I'm for it, as long as you're not victimizing anyone. Let's go for it. But because whoever comes out there and goes, hey, listen, I don't want anybody making a lot of money, most of the time it's because they're making a lot of money.
Yes.
But yeah, that was something that came to my mind. I was like, man, as he's diving in, and I know you do like thorough research, there has to be someone who got bought off, someone who placed a vote for Team A versus Team B because their pockets were filled. So that will be interesting. Let's get back to the subject of this disputed national champions. As you've handed this book out to friends and trusted colleagues, and they've read through this book, have they come back to you and pushed back a little bit, going, hey, I'm a Nebraska fan, and we should have won that national championship, or I'm a Michigan fan, and what has been the response of those fan bases?
So one thing that I've done, even outside of this book project, that most people receive rather well, some people have pushed back on me as though the AP poll and the rankings are some kind of to confront those or challenge those as blasphemy. Is that I have gone through every season throughout college football, and I'm still in the process of recording it, but I've basically started in 2023. Well, of course, we're not going to dispute a Michigan national championship because there was a legitimate playoff and all that sort of thing. But just to be formal, gone through each year. But I have challenged, did this team belong in the playoff? Now, I can't project them all the way to winning a national champion, but I've taken note of UCF here, Ohio State here, so-and-so here, TCU, Baylor here, had a claim to get into the playoff, had a legitimate argument. So anyway, comb through that. But once we get past the playoff, going back in time and start to hit the BCS era, there are significant flaws that I take note of. And so I'm reworking the national champions. And if nobody pays attention to it, that's fine. It's for my own thought process. And so if somebody says, how many national championships does so-and-so have? I look at my list and say, well, they've got this many. I don't trust the powers that be. I do not trust them. I have vetted it out. And what that's produced, unfortunately, and I know that this is not optimum, is more multiple championships, because there are seasons in which, take for example, if it's 1997, you brought that up a few times. If I'm sitting there and I'm an AP voter, so I will give them this disclaimer. If I'm sitting there in 1997, I clearly believe that both teams equally earned a national championship, and we will never know who would have won a game. They both played powerhouse schedules in legitimate conferences. Their schedules are very close. Michigan did not have the luck that a Nebraska did against Missouri, with a ball deflecting off a cleat in the end zone to save the game. But Nebraska was far more dominant at the conclusion of the season than Michigan was. So you've got your push and pull there. But if I'm sitting there and I'm an AP voter, I've got to make a decision. Now, there were people that chickened out and split their votes, but I would not have done that. So I would have had to make a determination. So I understand it was difficult, but there should be as many as 5 national champions in particular seasons, especially when you go back into the 60s and 70s with less games and more ties and all of that. So it gets quite messy, but I'm myself rewriting history just to be fair. 1983, you mentioned off the top of teams elevating out of nowhere. Miami played Nebraska in the Orange Bowl. Nebraska was considered maybe the greatest team of all time. They were 17-point favorite. Bernie Kosar's Miami team pulls off the upset. Howard Schnellenberger, 31-30 on the failed 2-point play. Okay, great. Miami, a 28-3 loser against Florida at one point in the season, is the national champion. I'm not taking that away from Miami. 11-1 national champ. They beat Nebraska head-to-head. However, we've got Auburn involved. If you look at Auburn's schedule, it's ridiculous how tough their schedule is. They went 11-1, won the Sugar Bowl. Okay. In addition to that, well, if you say, okay, well, let's give Auburn a share, as many services out there do, a share of that national championship. Well, Texas was 11-0 going into the Cotton Bowl. They lost to Georgia by 1 point on a muffed punt to finish 11-1. And they also beat Auburn. They were the team to beat Auburn in the regular season by 2 scores.
Wow.
So if you're going to include Auburn, then you got to include Texas. And the other process that I saw play out, and you'll follow along with this, I believe, is that, and there's an argument here. I'm not saying what my perspective is truth and law. I understand the other perspective, but that bowl games are treated as playoff games by these voters. Okay, if you lost your bowl game, you're done. That was a playoff game.
Right.
Well, it's not a playoff game. It's an additional game. It's a very important game, maybe the most meaningful game of the season, because you're playing the best team that you've played. If you're like a number 1, number 5 team and you're in that range, you're probably playing the best team you played all year. So it's a very meaningful game. But I see all sorts of examples going through the years where teams, and again, this is prior to the BCS era, this is back in the poll era, that had remarkable regular seasons, lost a game in a bowl game by, we'll take Nebraska, for example. They can't be the national champion because we kind of look at that as a playoff game. I don't look at these bowl games. I look at them as additional data points.
Oh, that's well said. That is well said. You said something that I never realized. I mean, I'm today years old learning this. I did not know that voters could split their vote on a national champion. Huh. And then what? Go. No,
Well, I was going to
please.
say, when you talk about backdoor deals, back channel deals, I got to think there 1991 with Miami, Washington, 1997 with Nebraska, Michigan. It very much has the appearance because both years, those respective polls were both voting one team number one going into the bowl, that there was this kind of back channel decision that, okay, they both went undefeated, they both won. Let's make sure that we're going to go Michigan, you go Nebraska, we'll do the right thing. That's kind of the way it should play out, because both of them, both years, one of the polls swung in the other direction to even it out and split the championship.
Wow. Wow. Well, I'm not going to continue to go down this path, but I am one of those guys that when I hear someone say, "Listen, trust the experts," I'm like, "And why?" Because not always are the experts truly the experts. They may be yes men and yes women who are willing just to go along. And I know that gets a little conspiracy theorist for people, but I'm sorry. I mean, that's reality. So to me, if it can happen in so many different sectors of life, it can definitely happen in college football, where there are hundreds of billions of dollars produced. There's TV deals. There's schools suing to get out of their conference because the conference is not looking out for their betterment, while they have to sit and watch other conferences do great. Then you step back and go, well, why did you sign the piece of paper? All of this bunch of stuff. I'm just going to leave that there. But if you do write a book on corruption in college football, please thank me in a footnote. But I'm going to leave that there.
Well, let me say this, because you brought up a great point about credibility and about so-called experts. So think about this. I can speak to this directly. For 7 years, as a sports director at a CBS affiliate, I was showing up at news conferences every week, talking to the players, talking to the coaches at 3 major SEC schools, going to the games, et cetera, and working alongside and building relationships with, let's say, AP writers, the local, the guy from the Tuscaloosa newspaper and the Jackson, Mississippi, and the Memphis paper, et cetera. Okay, this became extremely apparent to me. We're relying on national championship votes, top 25 voting from these people. And to their discredit, if you are on the Ole Miss beat, football beat, that's all you care about. That's what you're covering. It's not your responsibility to know the too deep for Michigan or Notre Dame, especially pre-internet. Now, with the internet, they have access to information more readily. So I'm sure it's gotten a little bit better, or quite a bit better. But still, in working with these people, alongside these people, it became extremely obvious to me way before I ever thought about writing a book or bringing this to light. Just it became obvious to me, we're talking back in the late 90s into the 2000s, that these people are so focused on the team they're covering. They have to know everything intimately about that team. They don't know what's going on in these. They don't go to these, like, here's what would happen, Brian, on a football Saturday. Is, for me, if I was going to the Alabama LSU game in Tuscaloosa, and let's say it was a 2:30 Central Time kickoff, I'd have to be packed up and leave with a cameraman way before noon, way before the Central Time 11 a.m. kickoffs were. So I would never see any of those games. I'd travel to that Alabama LSU game. Kickoffs at 2:30. They played 3.5 hours. I'd go to the locker rooms for interviews, the news conferences afterwards, an hour and a half to get through traffic back to the state. I'm working the entire day, and all I know about is Alabama and LSU. That's all I've worked on the entire day. I have no idea what else is going on, what's happening in college football. I'm tunnel vision. That's how these writers are. That's their job. Their job's not to know what's going on at UCLA or Clemson or anywhere else. They have no idea. That's not their job, but they're voting on national championships. And that's reflected in the Heisman vote. That's been proven. Regional bias in the Heisman vote. that they vote for the players that they've seen that year.
I have one mouth, but so many thoughts right now, and I know we're coming up on time here, and I need to have you back on because I want to talk about this more, not just the book. I want to talk about this because this leads into the book. But I know that on my channel, obviously I have the Clemson stuff around me, but I have people from other teams on. I had someone to talk about the Big 12 the other day, and I'm telling you, folks, as a person who does this as a hobby, but I do it a lot, there are things about Clemson that I miss. So I have a very difficult time knowing about some of the players that's on teams that we even play. Is it because I'm not so serious about it, or is it because it's so much information, no matter how much access I have to the internet and so on, it's just so much information. I mean, it's like drinking from a fire hose. I believe what you just said is one of the reasons why we're seeing players hold up a Heisman Trophy, and it's most of the time a quarterback and a guy who's an outrageous wide receiver, an outrageous defensive lineman who changes the course of a game will never touch it. I believe it because of that, and I believe I look at the AP poll and I just laugh half the time because I'm like, this is a joke, and it's because of that statement right there. That is so insightful, man. That is so incredible. So thank you for sharing that, because I think that shares or shows more of anyone who's going to watch this video, whether you like it or not, the truth about how these teams are being placed in positions that they're placed in, and players are receiving trophies that maybe they're great, but maybe someone else deserves it.
I sometimes insult my viewership, and I hope I do it in a kind and courteous way. But I'm being completely truthful, because they have other things to think about. They have families and jobs. They're not called to be college football experts. They're fans. For example, you brought up, Brian, the Nebraska-Michigan controversy of 1997. I have had so I produced a video, and so many people were disappointed because I did not say who would win the game. But no, my goal of the video before I ever got into this book was to lay out, what were the resumes, what was the fairness of this vote, et cetera, et cetera. But what was funny was we launched this into a live stream. And so we had, here's the Michigan argument, here's the Nebraska argument. Do you think that I had, out of dozens and dozens, probably definitely hundreds of comments in the chat, but also dozens and hundreds of comments to the video, and people they called, I took calls for like a couple hours on this. Do you think there was one Michigan fan who acknowledged in any way that Nebraska would have had a chance in this game? No, all the Michigan fans said, we would have won for sure. This wasn't even close. Yeah. Do you think we had one Nebraska fan who acknowledged that maybe Michigan could have won the game? No, we were done. Well, that shows you right there the obvious, just enormous bias, which I love, because they're fans. That's fine. You can be biased. I tell callers all this all the time. I'll say, you're completely biased on this topic, and they get offended. And then I'll say, you're a fan. You should be biased. I get it.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. It's so obvious that in all of these controversies where the fans, they align with their position, and it is extremely difficult. It's a rare case for any of them. I don't say that those people don't exist, because they do, that are able to remove themselves, as I do best I can. Yeah. I'm even biased. I admit that.
I'm biased.
Every so often people will go, you say that you're not biased, and that you're biased. And I say, no, you're not listening. I've never said I'm not biased. I have flesh and blood. I'm flesh and blood. I'm biased. I try to remove that as much as I possibly can. And based on results and responses to the channel over the years, I've done a pretty good job of doing that. But yeah, we're all biased.
We are. And I try to be as realistic with my Clemson team. And there's times I think, hey, man, maybe you go overboard and become a little pessimistic. A lot of people would say really pessimistic. But I try to be unbiased and treat everyone across the board the same, give them the same truth that I would give to my Tigers or vice versa. But you're right, there is that fan bias, and if you ever want to see how much emotion can affect logic, just bring up college football. So, my friend, again, congratulations on the book. Tell us where we can find this book, and also where we can find you.
So the book is titled Disputed National Champions, College Football's Historical 1990s Reset. So Disputed National Champions, you can just go to Amazon and look it up. I've got a link available on my channel. So you can follow me at the Voice of College Football. You can just look that up. Voice of College Football. We have, Brian, I don't even know what the count is now, like 40 team channels, something like that.
Oh, yeah.
But we are expanding by the week with all sorts of different content creators, but the Voice of College Football, and look this up on Amazon, Disputed National Champions. And again, I have the link posted in all the videos on the Voice of College Football.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Folks, I'm going to tell you this. If you want to read something, I haven't even read it yet, but I know this guy. And you've heard what he's talked about here, how in depth he went. He wasn't just looking, going, "Hey, I don't like Michigan, so I'm gonna say something bad about." No, he's not that. He is being just. You're just driven by what is the truth here. What drove this decision, folks? If you like that sort of thing, and I do, I hope you'll go buy the book. Also, if you haven't subscribed to Mark Rogers, most likely you have, but if you haven't, get over there, subscribe to his channel, and then find your team channel and subscribe to that one and let him know that you saw him here. Mark, thank you so much for coming on the channel. It's always a pleasure. Folks, I hope you have a good rest of the day. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, remember it's the sweetest words in the English language, free. So I hope you will. Y'all take care of yourself, and as always, go Tigers.